Management doesn't break because leaders lack intent. It breaks because information processing consumes the capacity to actually lead.
Welcome to Startuprad.io, your podcast and YouTube blog covering the German startup scene with news, interviews, and live events.
Most founders know the inflection point. You hit 50 employees and suddenly you're not building anymore. You're routing information. The old answer was add layers. The new answer is add AI. Today's conversation is about what happens when every manager gets a virtual chief of staff and why the 7-person ceiling was never biological. It was architectural. Bonjour. My guest today is Adrien Treccani, a founder and CEO of Supervised from Zug in Switzerland. And as you can already tell by the bonjour, he's Swiss French is right. Adrien scaled Metaco through extreme regulatory pressure to $250 million exit to Ripple, building one of Europe's leading digital asset custody platforms. But somewhere in that journey, he discovered that management itself was the bottleneck, not because people couldn't lead, but because information processing left no room to lead. Supervised is the answer, a virtual chief of staff for every manager, enabling flat organizations that move like startups. This conversation is about what really breaks at scale, why voice reveals what dashboards hide, and how AI finally makes the super manager organization possible. Bonjour, Adrien.
Pleasure to be here, Joe.
Totally my pleasure. We can say bonjour, we can say grüezi. It's all fine. Let us dive right in. At Metaco, you scaled through banks, regulators, multiple jurisdictions. What was the first moment you realized the organization itself had become the constraint? Was it like when you had to open 50 Excel sheets to find one information?
I mean, look, the truth is I started Metaco as a solo founder. So it was my first entrepreneurial journey. So I had no perspective over what it could become and what it was going to become. In fact, quoting a good friend of mine who is a very successful entrepreneur, he told me one day that he said, Adrien, had I known how painful and complicated that entrepreneurial journey would be, I would have never started. You kind of need to be a bit ignorant to even start. And that was very true for me. And I started ignorantly, but passionate about blockchain technology, having been trading cryptos for many years, already since 2013. And realized that it was very hard, actually, to get into a large enterprise, a large bank, subject to regulations, with high quality requirements. And so very early on, I had to start scaling the team with limited financial means. But I had this ambition as an entrepreneur to remain extremely flat and agile. Although I had that very clear vision of where the company could go, I wanted this to be a very collaborative journey, close to the engineering team, to the sales team, etc. And for the first 18 months, I would argue it worked very well. It was very egalitarian, very ambitious team of people that would work collaboratively. But at some point, this doesn't work anymore. Let me just give you an example. The first big bank that we signed, I'm not going to say which one, but a large Asian bank. They threw at us dozens of people that each of them had requirements to their own functions. The head of legal, the head of compliance, the head of cybersecurity. All of these guys had, dozens of questions, debates, and reasons to ask more features from our product. So very quickly, the small startup that we were had to start scaling, adding people. adding people not just where you would expect, like in the engineering team to build faster, but adding people on the delivery team, to be able to actually eat all of these requests from your clients, the communication, adding customer success people that would manage the expectations, also be the professional apologizers when something doesn't go as planned. And you start creating these departments, and very quickly we realize that the flat structure doesn't seem to work anymore. You're like the lonely CEO with 15, 20 direct reports, and you start realizing that you become a massive bottleneck, and that bottleneck at some point hurts your company. And so you have to start thinking about layers. And this is, I would argue, where everything starts changing. One layer is possibly, one additional layer is something you can still, deal with, because you're still in very close proximity of the people which are on the ground, building the software, selling it, in touch with the customers, really, the people that are operationally active in building that value in your company. And you can make decisions quite fast. If they have to escalate something, they just pick up the phone or write you a message, and you can make that decision. Once you realize that you actually have to create more layers, and generally for me, it kicked in around 40, 50 people, then things start collapsing. This sort of improvised structure where you need something, just ask for it, no longer works. You have that very complex network of people starting to ping each other. This complexity starts growing, and the structure you had created is no longer sufficient. And this is where, I'm sure we'll speak about it, but you have to start putting processes in place, reporting. The culture of your company is now at risk. The practices you had no longer work. I think this is the first drama that you face as an entrepreneur when you get to that size.
When you talked about adding more people, I was taken back, like more than 1.5 decades ago, running my first project. And then I realized, okay, the first 5 people, they are efficient. If you add 5 more people, that's great. But if you end up at more people, the productivity per person decreases because you have to add layers and layers of administration. I think that's one point to keep in mind. Also, you talked about you added layers to solve it. When did you realize that this was just redistributing the problem and not really solving it?
Very successful serial entrepreneur as an early investor, and he always told me, Adrien, you'll see when you reach 40 people, everything is going to change and you're going to suffer, my friend. And I say, oh, come on, what are you saying? Why would that be the case? I have great colleagues, great employees, we get along well, a lot of competence in the company. But, so many factors happen at the same time. The first one is when you need to scale, suddenly you don't have months and months to select the perfect candidate. You start hiring people because you have a good gut feel, or because this is the best out of the few candidates that you've interviewed. Sometimes you sacrifice the culture and you favor the competence, or the other way around. And quite quickly, this actually forms a pretty inefficient mix. And exactly as you said, you tend to believe that adding people will linearly scale your productivity, but it's by far sublinear. I would even argue that there is some sort of horizontal asymptote that comes quite quickly, that is very, very hard to actually cross. So for me, as I mentioned, it was around 40, 50 people. We started having some of the parts of the company which had 2 layers of intermediation below me and below myself in the org chart, in particular in the commercial team. And politics started to appear. People start speaking about salaries, about the job titles that they have, about the career development possible options that they have in the company, and internal competition starts. And internal competition is not necessarily unhealthy, but when the company is not yet prepared for it and is still operating in a startup mode where everybody is somewhat innocent, and innocently contributing, but you have new people joining, or simply a new atmosphere that promotes internal competition and, politics in the background, it can quickly become very tricky. And so, you discuss this with your board, or you discuss this with experienced entrepreneurs, and they will tell you, hey, yeah, you need to start putting in processes, and you're like, no, I don't want processes. But yeah, you have to, start putting in place, I don't know, the most basic form of a process could be to put a CRM in place for your sales team, which obviously you want to start as early as possible. But it goes way beyond this, processes for the hiring of new candidates, processes for validating any decision, processes simply to move information up and down and left and right. And these processes start turning the contributors, the employees, to some degree, not just into productive contributors of the organization, but also at some point into basic information routers, that start having to not just do their work, but have to take a bit more time on their day to explain what they did, and push this information left, right, up, down, get authorizations for everything they do. And I think it's unavoidable, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I also think this is the explanation of why a company becomes increasingly inefficient and slow in making decisions and progressing.
Former colleague of mine, a former boss, said, Joe, if a company surpasses 2,500 people, it doesn't care about the outside anymore. It only cares about itself anymore. And that's kind of the trajectory that you're already hinting at. So you built trust infrastructure for banks handling billions, cryptographic certain for digital assets. How did that shape how you think about organizational intelligence? Plus, I do have an additional question, because I was once talking to somebody who also offered crypto custody, crypto asset custody. I was asking him at what level his paranoia is, and he said on the absolute highest level. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer the second part first. I mean, the funny thing, we were the absolute experts of digital asset custody. And for those of the listeners that don't know what it means, effectively, we were the digital safe deposit for cryptocurrencies in large banking institutions. So if your bank was offering a crypto trading service, it was very likely that behind the scene, they were using my solution, my company, to secure these holdings. Now, even though we were the experts in this, I can tell you that for my own private cryptocurrencies, I was the most absolute paranoid person, not believing in my own actions in managing them, despite the fact I knew all of the theory, because it is so critical and it is so easy to make a mistake. And it also emphasizes how humans are imperfect. You might know the theory, but knowing the theory and having practiced it for many years does not immunize you against making a mistake by yourself. And this is why, as you grow as a company, you will always start thinking in terms of decentralization of risk. Even the CEO himself actually generally cannot do everything just by signing a document. It needs to be approved by a second party, perhaps by the board of directors. This is enforced typically by the charters of the company, by the shareholder agreements. But in the context of digital assets, this is enforced cryptographically, with cybersecurity infrastructure. But clearly it creates that paranoid mindset, and I will argue that it taints the way you then see an organization. You see people which are, and I'm going to say this with all respect that is required, but people that contribute in an organization are probabilistic agents in the sense that they generally do their best, but the output of what they produce is probabilistically good, but it's also probabilistically bad. Sometimes it's just not what you expect. And so to get people to converge to a particular objective, to get the output that you want from your company, you need to create deterministic structure around this chaos. You need to make sure that your teams are converging to the ambition of your company. And as a paranoid leader, I would say a rationally paranoid leader, you need to put in place these controls or this structure that will help everyone and guide everyone to the right trajectory.
Learned a new important word: rationally paranoid leader. I'll keep that at the back of my mind. Guys, we are also recording after this the Vault, the Founders Vault. In the Vault, we'll talk about there's a personal cost to scale that founders really discuss once the headlines fade. Let's ask you a little bit more, Adrien, when you're already here. The 7 direct reports rule has been management gospel for, a century. You're saying it was never biological. It was architectural. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a funny thing because it's not just in business. It's true even in private life. How many of the people you would call friends are you actively keeping in touch with? Actively in the sense that you proactively write to them, ask how they're doing, keep some room in your brain to allocate, to really have interest in what they do. It's probably just a couple of people, because the reality is that if you have to care about your children, about your wife, about a couple of friends, and of course what you're doing at the work, very quickly you reach the limits of what your brain is meant to do, which is really invest yourself in other people's ventures. And what is true in private life is very much true in the corporate life. You look at a team of whichever department, whether it's engineering, sales, product, delivery, legal, etc. Build that team beyond 6, 7, 8 people, and you start having a big drama. People stop communicating, or if they communicate, it becomes very inefficient. The manager of this team has a hard time then understanding what everybody is doing and giving clear direction. And it's often been qualified as being some sort of a biological limit. And I would actually argue it's not entirely wrong, but it's related mostly, in fact, to all of the context switching and the time you have to invest into low value added, constraints. For instance, when you deal with 7, 8 people in your team, are you truly spending all of your time coaching them, making decisions, solving their problems? Or are you actually spending most of your time trying to get a status update on what they're doing, having face-to-face meeting, answering your colleague about something that's happening in your team, writing information up and down again? And the truth is, if you poll managers in companies of 50 employees to 50,000 employees, pretty much any size beyond the trivial amount of people, they will tell you that they spend at the very least 1 day a week, basically just doing status collection, understanding what is happening in their team and trying to figure it out. And in companies where, corporate structure has started to emerge as the dominant factor, like large companies with lots of processes, it can be that the manager is spending more than half of his time just doing that, writing information, filling up reports, supporting the processes of the organization, etc. And therefore, the truth is, the real dominant friction that you're facing when you want to scale a company is that one. It's information collection, information routing, satisfaction of the processes that the company has put in place. If you can automate it out, if you can say this boring part of my job is now, let's say, automated in a way that, of course, I'm still involved, but I can delegate it to a specialized party, I'm already able to scale way past 7 people, way past 8 people. There are companies which are good examples of this, like NVIDIA, where, Jensen Huang is well known to have many more than 7, 8 reports. It can work, but you need the proper support. This support can be human-led. It can be that you have a chief of staff or a personal assistant or a series of personal assistants that will help you do that. But it can now be AI-driven. And I guess this is where Supervised, my company, is positioned today.
Just going through ideas here at this moment. Do you read science fiction?
I do.
Yes. I love Peter F. Hamilton. He had, before AI was where it was today, 10, 20 years ago, everybody in his science fiction novels was already carrying around chips in their brain, and they had an AI called the e-butler that helped them with everything, filtered emails and so. And that really actually reminded me of that. Can you, coming back to reality here, sorry for my detour, can you walk me through what Supervised actually does? What does it mean to give every manager a virtual chief of staff?
The basics of it is actually very simple, but I'm going to illustrate it with an example. The dream of a sales team in an organization is that they can rely on a properly populated CRM, a tool they use to track every deal that's currently being activated, the progress, the actions, etc. And in a perfect world, that CRM would have incredibly high quality information. And as a manager, you would just extract a report out of it every week and then make your decisions. In practice, the CRM, you can ask any company, always has garbage data. It's always outdated, sometimes by weeks or months. You can have deals that you were supposed to close like a few months ago, which are still in the CRM and actually not closed at all. You can have estimates on the revenue forecast, which are off the reality by 50% or more. And so the reality is that you realize that you truly cannot trust information which is in your systems of records, because that friction between what humans have in their brain and what is in your Excel sheet, in your PowerPoint, in your CRM is so high that nobody wants to actually do it. And therefore, you cannot trust the data that you get out of it. And so how does an organization solve that? Well, like any human would, you start organizing face-to-face meetings. You organize a one-to-one every Monday with every of your employees. You ask them what actually is happening. You remind them to update the CRM in that specific example. And it burns already one day of your week, and is it truly value added? Have you really truly achieved anything here except being the police of the CRM or the police of reporting? No, you've not achieved anything. And so the first step in resolving that management duty, which is indeed to understand what is happening and help drive the direction, is to be able to build, to collect and build and route that quality information in the same way you would if you were facing the person in your office or, in the kitchen having a coffee with the employee, but without having to do that synchronous meeting every week that is low value added, that both sides feel is a bit of a waste of time. And how do you achieve that? Well, you create an intermediary. You add that intermediary. That intermediary could be, again, some sort of a personal assistant, but personal assistants are very expensive. Let's call it chief of staff. It's very expensive and it's hard to scale at the level of every layers of your organization. So let's call this chief of staff now an AI that actually is able to speak, has voice capabilities, is able to understand the current context of the organization, what is happening, what are the current risks, the current goals, the current targets for every employee, and can schedule discussions with employees the same way a chief of staff or an assistant would. Say, hey, Joe, do you have a few minutes tomorrow for a quick call? And would actually call you on your Teams, call you on your Slack, call you on your WhatsApp, wherever you're available, even if you're driving or in the train, and would open dialogue with you. And of course, this assistant is very smart. She understands what is currently relevant. If there is a deal which is critical to the company, or if there is the delivery of a new feature in the product which is critical and on which I need an update, or if the budget seems to be going off rails and needs to be adjusted. And it pushes you to speak about it and give that high quality context about what is actually happening in the organization. Now, of course, having that context is not enough. Then what you want to do with it is route it to everyone that needs it. It might be much more than your direct manager. It might be that you are the engineering team that needs to share information with the product team, or the product team that needs to share information to the sales team. Potentially, it is even the CEO sharing information downstream to the employees about the company direction. And so once you've achieved that routing of information, then comes decision making. Then comes, I'm a manager. I see there is something happening. I understand because my AI is flagging to me that there is a risk or a need for my support. And then can I activate the face-to-face with my employee and the discussion and the investigation? And then can I start using the tool to formalize my decision and push it downstream? By having this automation, what you're actually achieving is that you are delegating to an AI the entire boring part of the journey of a manager and an employee. You're making this asynchronous. You're delegating this to an AI, which, is smart, but doesn't need to be, a 200 IQ sort of human. And you're keeping to yourself as a manager and yourself as an employee only the quality time with each other so that you can truly be coach or coach and you can truly get to problem solving and decision making.
We've been talking about personal assistant. I would also add it's usually pretty time consuming and difficult to get a personal assistant who can really think along with you and can really assist you. A lot can take away some daily duties, but if you that if you have somebody who really helps you to think, to make your life easier, it's very hard to find, and they're usually very, very rare. You at Supervised, you have this personal assistant, this personal chief of staff, but why voice? What does voice capture that dashboards systematically are erasing?
Coming back to my example before with the CRM, where the data is always incomplete and outdated, whatever policing process you put in place, that's not just true for CRM. This is true for all of the reporting you can think of, from basic Excel sheet filling to HR surveys, to delivery project supervision. Data is never accurate, whichever tool you use. And that's truly because there is this friction. Everybody hates writing things on a keyboard. You've already had a very painful and long day. You've already discussed with 20 different clients. Why the hell would you take, time on your dinner, which you well deserve with your wife, to report things in an Excel sheet? So if you have to do it, you will do it, but you will be very minimalistic in doing so. Whereas if you actually, take 5 minutes every day, or let's say 10 minutes a couple of times a week, to just receive a call which has been blocked in your agenda, as if you were speaking with one of your colleagues, and you don't really have to think, you just follow the conversation and speak your mind out naturally. The results that we get with this is that a human actually, humans as we are, actually enjoy the process. It releases you from that pressure of having to do something in addition to your job, because you now feel it's part of your job. You can just speak your way through it. You can even do it when you're in the train or in your car. And that conversation reveals that you actually get incredibly high quality data. You get people to speak the way they would when they're facing their managers, except that they're doing this in a way that is recorded without any pressure from the manager potentially making a mistake in what you're saying. And you're doing just once. You don't have to repeat it anytime. You do it once, and you know that anybody that needs this information is going to get it. That's extremely releasing, makes your life much more comfortable. And as soon as you start playing the game, and it goes pretty quickly, and you can start forgetting about the rest of your reporting, well, then you see it as a way to almost remove that pressure that you get from reporting duties. You realize that, nobody's going to complain. My manager is going to stop policing me because I just took this 5-minute call, and it becomes enjoyable to do.
Realize as a podcast host, what always sets us apart. You don't even need to see this person, but with just your tone of voice, how you're talking, what you're saying, it communicates much, much more than just simply the words.
The reality about information gathering is that the truth of the situation of a company or a team never appears in the reporting. You will never get the true insights, the tacit knowledge, what people truly think, if you just read a basic report. Because people keep this for face-to-face and discussions around the coffee machine. This information is only captured when you face someone, you discuss it, and hints, clues can be captured in what you say and how you say it, perhaps how you move, and you're encouraged to speak freely. If you have to type it down, you will start shaping information in a way to protect yourself, to minimize the effort, and obviously, therefore, all of the value is gone.
There's always a lot of tension involved in a lot of this stuff. Managing people, having dashboards, especially when a dashboard shows red. I vividly remember stuff like this. For our audience, if such tension resonates with you, have you ever felt becoming a human router? Stay with us. The second half is about what becomes possible when you break free. Adrien, you talk about super managers who lead 30 people instead of just 7. Walk me through why that's not just overload with a much better name.
Since the Industrial Revolution, the scaling of a company has been always the same way. You need more scale, you grow vertically, you add layers of mid-management. And this is, as we discussed, what creates that inefficiency. You grow the distance between the people on the ground that produce content, that face clients, and the people making decisions, and that distance creates chaos. And so you want a company that remains agile, you need to flatten it. You need to grow horizontally, not vertically. But as we discussed, this is actually pretty hard to achieve because the more you grow your team horizontally, the more it's hard for managers because they become overflowed. They don't know what to do to keep this in sync, to understand what their team is doing, where to be involved, how to satisfy all of the processes, etc. And so our view at Supervised is that the company of the future, now that AI is a thing, is a company where you actually don't need as many managers. You need many less managers or mid-managers. You need managers that can do more and that scale horizontally with many more direct reports rather than massive massive teams that grow vertically where everybody is trying to, grow, create politics to get better title, better salaries, etc. But to achieve this, again, you need to remove all of the frictions. It's one thing, philosophically to have as a name that you can have 20, 30 direct reports. But it's a different thing to actually implement this. But we know now that it is possible. To achieve this, you need to scale the ability to understand what the team is doing, for you to best react to it in terms of identifying risks, making quick decisions, quickly reverting to the people that need your attention. And this is only achieved if you intermediate this with a systematic process of context analysis. This virtual chief of staff that will go through your org and for every single of the hundreds of thousands of employees will capture this information, write it where it needs to go, and flag the actions that are needed.
You just talked about an org chart here. If managers can lead something like 30 people because AI handles the operational overhead, what happens to those organizational structures? And just a side question, are you afraid there will be more operational overhead, like more reports, more stuff?
I mean, look, I think that it cannot be more than what's today. You look at any large organization, from the junior intern at the bottom of the hierarchy to the top guy, the CEO having to report to the board. It's all about reporting and processes. You want to make the slightest decision in this company, you have to go through 5 different approvals, 6 different departments, and 7 different opinions. This never ends. And that's the explanation of why these large companies, are unable to generally innovate by themselves. They need to acquire companies that have been able to take more risks, to go faster, because themselves have become unable to move fast and take risks. And so, can it be worse than this? No, it cannot. I think any large organization will recognize that it is, simply becoming incapable of producing. It maintains and somewhat scales what it already has, but it is in a very tough position to create something that's truly innovative and truly changing its landscape. So, a flat organization, is what the implication of a flat organization is that the person that is building and has the ideas is potentially 3 years away from the CEO, even if in a company of 10,000 people. And that's the really game changer.
Real game changer. I really like that. Guys, we'll be back after a short ad break. We talk about most enterprises. We'll be back after a short ad break. We'll be back after a short ad break. Most enterprise tools promise efficiency. Few deliver the structural transformation that changes how organizations can design. Guys, welcome back after short ad break. I'm still talking to Adrien, and we are currently talking how AI can enable managers, flatten organizations, and basically screw up everything that management handbooks or many management handbooks have told us over the last decades, century, long time anyway. Adrien, I was wondering, where does automation help leadership and where does it create false confidence? We just talked about like the operation, the additional overhead, the additional reports. Is it just because you simply get more reports, you feel more safe? How can automation help, and where are potential problems in false confidence?
I mean, I think it is important to realize what are the limits of AI. If you follow the marketing posture of the largest AI companies on the market today, you might be tempted to believe that we are about to get into an post-AGI world where AI is superior to humans in pretty much every intellectual matter. And for certain things like summarizing texts and extracting certain kinds of outputs out of a text, AI is pretty damn good. For producing things like pictures, videos, etc., also pretty damn good. However, for reasoning with a little bit of common sense, AI is still an incredible disaster. And I have to say it because you don't realize how big of a disaster it is unless you've truly played with it professionally and tried to build something. AI is not mature yet. It is extremely unstable in the way it makes decisions. And if you truly delegate the most human parts of your job, of your work, you can be facing disaster. And I'm not surprised actually that we start seeing statistics about the success rate of pilots in large enterprise, and they are actually not so good. Most pilots fail to deliver the value that they hope to deliver. The reason for this is that you have to make sure that the friction to use this tool is very low, because we as humans don't like to change our habits. But we also have to, give a pretty high level of confidence that the automation that you're putting in place is going to lead to the right results most of the time. Because, as humans are imperfect also in nature, but it is supposed to be the job of a company, or the role of a company, to find the best of us to contribute to the best positions in the company, so that generally speaking, the output that you produce is of good quality and is more often right than wrong. But when you replace a human with a machine, then you have the same expectations, right? If the AI is more often wrong than right, or is simply too many times wrong, then you have to hire humans to control the machine, and you're back in doing the same thing. You might as well have just a couple of humans rather than machines plus human. And so I think what you quickly learn when building these kind of solutions is that we are not yet at a phase where replacing human intelligence is the right strategy. Human intelligence is still very much relevant and needed in any form of organization. And I would argue that it's true for even sole contributors, like software engineers building software. Yes, AI is very helpful, can help being faster in delivering and shipping your code. But the code quality is by far not equivalent to a senior engineer having done this for many years. And so what do you have to be concerned about? What you have to be cautious about is finding the right places where AI actually is intelligent enough and skilled, and perhaps more skilled than humans. And stopping here, for now at least, until AI becomes better. And this is where I think Supervised is so competent. Our company has found the perfect fit for AI, where it's good enough to speak to people in an organization. It's good enough to extract what is urgent, what is a risk, what is something requiring attention. It's good enough to understand whom in the organization actually needs this information and when it should be flagged. It's good enough to recommend best response to managers. It's good enough to track all of this, audit the flows of decisions, etc. But it's not good enough to actually make the decision itself. And so it positions itself as a support to managers, a support to employees, by far not as a replacement. But this support is so good that it allows the manager to go from that 7 sort of direct reports to something which is potentially 2 or 3 times as large.
Talked about good and bad pilot projects. We've been talking about what AI can and can't do, and what may be a potential impact on org charts. So I was wondering, what breaks next as companies adopt AI native management infrastructure? Because my first thought would be much faster decisions. And of course, again, in the back of my mind, more reports.
Yeah, I think report or reporting is perhaps not the right word. It's very much unsexy. It's very much boring, and it's very much annoying. But there is some truth to it. You want to have a company that works. You need to understand what's happening somewhere else in the company. So you can call it information routing, or you can call it simply understanding the context for your decisions to make sense. But ultimately, this is some form of automated reporting. You need it in an organization. And I would say you actually need it not just the more you grow, but also the more of a modern company you are, because most modern companies have a lot of remote work from home, different people hired in various countries, sometimes at the other side of the globe. And therefore, it implies that you have completely different time zones, languages, cultures, and you still need to synchronize all of that mess, if I can say. It's extremely complicated. And so how do you do this again? You go back to having all of these meetings or asking people to fill up Excel sheets at the end of the week. And what Supervised is about is precisely removing that need, precisely removing that reporting burden. I hate that word reporting. I had to implement reporting in my previous company, and I hated it. Even myself as a CEO and founder, I didn't want to be doing my own reporting. So I was trying to avoid my own process, So what Supervised is about is precisely getting rid of that requirement and bringing something which increases the quality of what is, the replacement of reporting, and allowing your company to become what I would argue is the Saint Graal of organization management, which is creating that real-time company that can make real-time decision making. If you have real-time information, you can make real-time decisions, in particular if you have that assistant, that chief of staff supporting every of your actions.
I would like to take now a little bit different step, because you made a quite big exit with Metaco. I was wondering, after this exit, what changed in how people approached you? What's the reality that no one prepares founders for? Because everybody wants to have a big exit, and then it happens, and then basically the script ends.
This is a bit of a personal story that I will share here. But the first thing, the good side, once you've sold your company, your credibility changes dramatically. Like even when you're not supposed to be truly expert on a specific topic, because you've succeeded at creating, growing, and selling a company, you've closed the cycle. People start giving you credit for pretty much anything you say. It doesn't mean that everybody will believe you. You always face critics, but it's to a certain degree, you have even more credibility than if you had just grown substantially a company and you were just remaining as the CEO. It's almost like you've closed the full cycle. And so it means that many of the fights that you were going through before to just meet a client, meet a senior person of a prospect at a prospect company, or to meet an investor, to seduce an investor into investing in your business. This is such a hard thing for first-time entrepreneurs. It doesn't mean it's impossible. If I'm still here today, is that it is possible, but it's very hard, very time-consuming. There is massive rejection. So you have to be extremely resilient, because, 9% out of 10 are going to reject you, say no to the meeting, or say they're not interested in investing, etc. You sell your company and suddenly table turned. You can get pretty much any meeting you want. Of course, not with anyone, but everything becomes much simpler. You can meet any investor you want. Meeting prospects, generally feels like a win-win also for him, perhaps because you're rich or you're successful. And therefore, the second venture is much easier to execute. It doesn't mean it's going to be easier to succeed. It's always hard to succeed, but all of the frictions that you've been facing the first time feels much more acceptable, much more easier to overpass. And so that's the good part. The bad side is that suddenly you as an individual, because you now have money on the side and you have much more responsibilities in your private life, your private life becomes a little bit like a business. You have to start optimizing. You have to potentially start hiring people to help you manage what you have. You have to be thinking about taxes, about lawyers, about where your potentially multiple residences, are you going to maintain them and optimize all of this life? And, I'm not going to complain. This is generally coupled with a lot of comfort that you never thought you might have. But this is, it means you now have a company has a private life. You have to start thinking about your decisions much more seriously, not just on the business side, but also on the private side. And initially, it's a bit of a shock, and it also comes with changes in the way people interact with you. You still feel like you're this, genuine and humble entrepreneur that has suffered for many years in bringing what he achieved. You still feel like you have everything to prove. You never feel like you're truly accomplished. Yet people start seeing you as a different person and will therefore treat you a bit differently, perhaps with more natural respect, which it's not necessarily a bad thing. But we'll also see you as somebody that can, that has more to, has some value to bring them, and therefore effectively will start treating you in a different way, with more interest, let's say. And if you're not careful, you might be abused with this. I'm not going to say that I was abused with this because, business-wise, you learn to also be a little bit skeptical and suspicious sometimes. And so if you have this professional paranoia, as we say, or rational paranoia, as we discussed before, then you might have it also in your private life. But yeah, relations change, not just with people you just met, but also with family, and you have to understand how to deal with it.
I understand. And also you may have to decide what's important in your life, where you put your time, developing a personal strategy. I think that there's a lot of questions we now leave aside, but I was wondering, when this goes out, the press release goes out a few days and people are coming, calling, emailing, there is a lot of noise. How do you filter that for the few important signals? Do you also use your AI?
No, I will. At some point, you have to take your duty seriously, and you have to be doing that effort. I mean, for the exit of Metaco, I'll be honest with you. This is something that I believe a lot of entrepreneurs go through. But when you have faced so many years of successes and failures, very big successes and very big failures, your brain starts to filter this out and makes you a little bit of a sociopath, if I can say, like you're less excited by success and you're less, depressed by failure. And so, to share something a bit private with you, even at the time of the exit of Metaco, for a lot of people, it felt like it was a massive event in the life of their best friend or family member, which was me. But for me, it was a straight line. I was not excited, no celebration, no champagne, didn't even look at the bank accounts, didn't even discuss with my close friends. Just went on as if it was a normal event. And so, yeah, you asked how I processed this. Well, I processed this by actually not really processing it. It was filtered out. And it took months that I started to think, okay, well, what are the implications and what am I going to do with this new sort of life that I'm facing?
Yeah, I think that's also something very important. Don't rush it. Relax. Think about what feels right.
I very much agree with this. I agree in theory. I have a hard time doing it in practice.
Isn't that the difference between?
Yeah.
Is that the difference between theory and practice here?
There's a big difference. I very much agree with you. I just can't sometimes apply the theory.
Awesome. We usually end with two practical questions. Number one, is Supervised currently open to talk to new investors?
Yes, I mean, we're not formally raising funds today, but we are certainly happy to discuss with investors. Any professional entrepreneur will tell you that it's actually good to speak with investors when you don't need them, and very, very bad to speak with them when you need their help. So yeah, we don't need them, but we're certainly happy to connect, happy to discuss, present what we do, and create a relation.
And are you also currently looking for talented people?
Oh, absolutely. This is actually something that I believe AI has a hard time resolving. It's still the hardest thing to do, finding the best people, convincing them to leave their incredible career to join you. So we are an incredible opportunity at Supervised. We certainly have multiple offerings now on the sales, marketing, engineering side in particular. If you have an interest for enterprise AI, you want to join a relatively early stage startup at extremely high growth, then please reach out. I'll be happy to discuss.
Adrien, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you as guest.
Thank you, Joe.
That was Adrien Treccani, founder and CEO of Supervised. We discussed leadership at scale, the limits of hierarchy, and why voice remains the most underutilized asset in management. You can find Supervised at supervised.ai and Adrien on LinkedIn. We'll also link the career website for the last question. That was a conversation about signal over voice.
That's all, folks. Find more news, streams, events, and interviews at www.startuprad.io. Remember, sharing is caring.